Hello again. I hope you're doing well. So here we are on day 2 of What If? And today I'd like to explore the topic of what if your greatest hardships are your greatest gifts? Now, you may have contemplated this in the past. You may just be throwing your hands up in the air saying, that's impossible. But I want to explore the idea, and I'm going to use my own examples because certainly I am a person who's, at least from the outside looking in, would say that I've had a lot of hardship in my life. But interestingly enough, I don't look at it that way. I do look at my hardships as some of my greatest gifts. And for example, I know for certain I would not be sitting here today speaking to you if I hadn't had these hardships to go through. This is what's given me the material that I'm able to share with you. And it also gave me the motivation over the years to grow, to heal, to explore myself and my situations and my journey. I became quite a spiritual person. I have a positive attitude. And at the end of this, if I can find it on my phone quickly, I meant to pull it up before we started, but today a friend of mine sent me a really great quote about optimists, and that optimists are not born. They're actually created from hardship. And it's a really great little passage that I'd like to read to you, but I may or may not. Anyway, when I read it, I thought, isn't that interesting? Because I would certainly define myself as an optimist. And perhaps that's part of the reason why, is that when you come from struggle and you make your way through it, you get to see the other side and you get to see the contrast. So this is something, again, you'll probably hear me mention Abraham Hicks if you haven't read any of the books or listened to tons of material on YouTube or seen Esther Hicks speak in person. I love the messaging that is given. But, it's explained that human beings are here to experience contrast. If we came from the all, from the infinite, amazing, all-loving universe, we made some sort of energetic decision to come here to Earth to have this human experience. And we know that human experience is all about contrast. We wouldn't, in fact, know what we did want if we didn't know through experience what we don't want. So that in and of itself, again, there's a lot of science involved in some of this philosophy. And interestingly enough, my son is studying physics and philosophy at university. And people think that they're so far off. But in fact, especially with quantum physics now, when you really take a deeper dive into it, they're not as far off as people might think. Either way, this hardships becoming our gifts. For example, we know this also to be true in terms of the career of addiction recovery counselors. It is, in fact, close to a prerequisite in many organizations that help those who are struggling with some form of addiction or mental health issue, but often, specific to addiction, that the counselors coming through and that are hired by these facilities and these organizations are recovering addicts, alcoholics, recovering addicts, because the most helpful way in which we see people who are struggling with addiction recover is with those who totally understand their journey. And it's very difficult, as you may know, to understand an addict's journey or their decision-making process or their lack of ability to make decisions if you're not an addict yourself. You know, that's when we get into all the why can't they just and so on and so on. So imagine that. These people who have come through their own super difficult lifetimes and have resorted to or fallen into addiction, and many of whom, you know, never thought they might get out. Perhaps they even died a few times, overdosing and so on. And they come through that. And not only do they come through, they become the catalysts for change for others in similar circumstances. They actually turn their greatest hardship into their greatest gift. And I think that we would see that most healers, whatever that looks like, there's many, many of them, and more every day on the planet. Most healers come from that experience. They have something to share with others because they have literally been through the fire. And they've come out from the fire, and they are not only surviving, but they're thriving. And they've become optimists. And they've become people who can see difficult circumstances from another viewpoint, through another lens. And this then becomes extremely inspiring and supportive to people who are struggling. And that goes beyond addiction as well, of course. Just going through difficulties is where we're able to relate to other people. And other people who are struggling need to hear from people who understand what their troubles are. So, you know, we can go, you know, what are the most inspiring stories that you've ever heard? You know, they make movies about them. They write books about them. And they always are the most challenging situations, are the most inspiring. People who are born with great disadvantage because of physical or mental challenges and so on. People who have accidents that are life-altering. People who, you know, of course, we hear about prisoners of war and things like that when wars are taking place, and how these people, you know, Nelson Mandela and so many more, how they survived what would seem to be insurmountable situations. It's the human spirit. So the human spirit is born and intensified through hardship. And that is something for you to have a look at in your own life. In my life, you know, I started out as a child in an extremely dysfunctional home. And I don't really like to focus too much on it. But the facts are the facts. My dad was a severe alcoholic. My mom was a heavy drinker anyway. I never thought she was an alcoholic. She didn't drink as much as my dad, but today I might say that they both were. I had a sister who had mental illness, who was very abusive, verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically. You know, I went through many, many difficult times as a kid growing up in that household. And yet, I was always able to keep going. And I reflect on that sometimes. You know, how was it that I was able to? And I think I was born with some sort of innate personality that I don't know if it was optimistic. But what I think today is that I had a huge heart. And I know that over the years, even though I was able to achieve externally, and that's where I put a lot of my effort to find my value, because I didn't get a lot of feeling of support and feeling valued from my parents, because they were so wrapped up in their own difficulties and issues and the disease of alcoholism that there just was no energy or time left for too much of that. So I set out looking for my sense of worth in things that I could achieve at school, at work, in athletics, whatever it might be. And, that's how I sort of found my place. But unfortunately, or the hardship that comes from a childhood like that, is that you have to build up so many walls around the heart because it just can only take so much pain or lack of love that you have to hide it away. You have to push it away, and you have to almost live a life that says it's not required. And that sounds really sad, and of course it is, but it allows a child to survive in situations that otherwise, could cause you to not be able to survive. And I know some people don't. But what I realized was that hardship kept my heart pretty closed off. I was always a loving person, and I always wanted to help people. That never left me. But I was always doing things, again, externally to help others. And I'm sure that part of that was in return, I felt a sense of worth. And, I would wait for people to tell me that I was a good person because I'd been helping. I wasn't necessarily just doing it out of the goodness of my heart. When it came to really close relationships with friends or family or spouses, even children to some degree, I think, I came to discover that my heart was actually quite closed off, and that I had a lot of issues around expectations, trying to control situations, because everything when you're a kid is so out of control that you're trying to control everything. I noticed a lot of behaviors, and of course I did become the drug addict alcoholic as well. So I had to go through all of that in terms of my own recovery. But what it did teach me was all that maybe anger and resentment that I may have had towards my dad, for example, that has to melt away at some point as you start to forgive yourself for your own behaviors. Because you can't resent the parent, or at least I couldn't, in the end, resent the parent when I, in fact, became the same person. I believe I had choices, and I still became a similar person. I became an addict anyway, became an alcoholic. And some of those behaviors also rubbed off on my children. So we have to start to develop some sort of compassion for those who came before us, and most importantly, to start to develop self-love, which really is the challenge of people like myself who have faced such hardship, because the heart has been closed off. So to really start to understand accepting myself, being okay with not being perfect, and how I looked to the outside world and what other people thought of me, and trying to be a people pleaser and a perfectionist and all those things that we end up becoming because our self-worth is actually so low. That takes a lot of self-development and counsel. Takes a lot of work, takes a lot of years. Took me a lot of years to get through all of these things. But in the end, all of my experiences and all of my understanding of where I came from, where I am today, is what I'm able to bring forward now to offer to those who are still struggling with their own personal issues. And it's really only through personal experiences that we can really, truly help another person who's struggling in that way. Or at least that's my belief. So that's the thought for you today. What if your greatest hardships are your greatest gifts? And just have a look at that and write that out, and maybe start to shift the perception of the situation, because we never want to live in victimhood. Just being a victim excuses you from having to do any work on yourself and having to grow. And you won't be happy if you're not growing here on planet Earth. That for sure is what we came here to do. Hardships cause us to grow. If we're just lounging around in the lap of luxury like we're in the Garden of Eden, there's not a whole lot that we need to do. And therefore, I don't know that there's a whole lot that we're actually bringing forward to the rest of the world to help them and to help planet Earth heal. And I believe we're in a huge transition here on Earth to help people heal, and it's an exciting time. Thank you. I'll see you again.